In recent weeks, some of my subscribers have awared me of a 3-part video series made by a small right-wing monarchist YouTuber, JustTheFacts. In it, he spends a great deal of time posturing, misrepresenting Marxist theory, and otherwise completely missing the point. In short, this video can best be described as yet another brain-dead rightist critique of Marxist theory, more specifically his theory of surplus value. To understand the theory of surplus value, one must first understand the labor theory of value. That is, the value of commodities, or the source of natural prices. The value of commodities is correlated with the socially necessary abstract human labor time needed to reproduce said commodities for sale on the market, and surplus value is the value produced by workers in excess of their own reproduction cost, which is then taken by the capitalist. Surplus value is the difference between the value of commodities sold and constant capital C plus variable capital V. But does he explain this? Does Mr. JustTheFacts have the facts on his side to refute Marxian theory? Well, let us go forth and see for ourselves. We'll go ahead and skip ahead a bit, though, as JustTheFacts spends the first minute and a half of his video posturing and condescending to us, before finally getting to the point.
Today's punching bag will be the concept of surplus value, which deserves an introduction. Marx sat down in the 1840s and conceived of the structure of the corporation. Products go out and money goes in. Logically, each worker should get the total money coming in divided by the percentage of products that they made. But alas! The devilish capitalist comes in and slices off the top a large portion for himself, leaving the oppressed workers naught but a paltry wage with which to buy bread and water for their families.
And right out the gates, his conceptualization of the theory is based on a straw man. The argument isn't that the capitalist is directly appropriating surplus value from the workers. This isn't feudalism. On the contrary, the capitalist actually does remunerate the worker according to the price of their labor time. The argument being posed is that there is a discrepancy between the value of the worker's labor, or the amount of pay needed to reproduce the workers, and the value of the products being sold on the market. And it is in the difference between the value of the worker's labor time, plus the machinery and tools used to manufacture the goods, and the value of the commodities produced and sold, which is where the surplus value is created. And this is how the exploitation manifests.
JustTheFacts is no longer arguing against Marxist theory, but a misrepresentation of Marxist theory. Since his arguments are premised on a straw man, the rest of the contents of this video can only be fractally wrong. In the same manner that if one were to make a mistake at the beginning of a long physics equation, the answer and the rest of the math which follows suit is automatically wrong. From here on out, everything that he says is just automatically incorrect. And that's it. Not even 2 minutes into the video and I have completely debunked part 1. Seriously, why would you make a video criticizing a theory that you clearly haven't investigated? It's crazy that you can sit here and spend almost 2 minutes posturing and condescending to us like you're some kind of expert on the topic when you clearly have no idea what you're talking about. I could end this video here, but then where's the fun in that?
There's just one tiny problem with the idea of surplus value. It doesn't exist anywhere.
If surplus value doesn't exist, then where does the money for investment come from? How can society support those who do not engage in productive labor? Where does tax revenue or multi-billionaires come from? In order to debunk a theory, you have to provide a better alternative which more accurately explains the phenomenon. Newtonian physics has been superseded by Einstein's theory of relativity. Lamarckism has been replaced by the theory of evolution. Curses and demons have been replaced with the germ theory of disease. Regardless, JustTheFeels is denying the facts here when he says surplus value does not exist. Material reality says otherwise. 1% of the world's population owns half of its resources. Here in the United States, the gap between the highest earners in the company and average workers is roughly a 300-to-1 ratio. Income inequality in virtually every country on Earth is only growing worse over time, and the primary way in which people become rich is not through hard work, but getting others to work hard for you. While we are living in the wealthiest age in humanity, that is, as a species we are richer than ever before, in both relative and absolute terms, the poor and working masses of the world are more destitute than ever before. and marginal utility and the subjective theory of value are too tautological in scope to explain the source of this phenomenon. The LTV, on the other hand, offers a far stronger explanation.
We'll start with the fact that it's incredibly difficult to draw the line between true workers and evil capitalists, especially in companies with hundreds, thousands, even millions of employees.
If he's arguing that class is based on income levels, then he is once again strawmanning the Marxist position. Class is not defined by income, but by one's relationship to the means of production. Workers sell their labor power for a wage and own no capital. A capitalist is somebody who owns capital and profits through exploitation, which manifests not only as wage labor, but as rents, dividends, intellectual properties, stock buybacks, and so on. The petty bourgeoisie, or the small business owner, is the continuum between the workers and the owners, holding some amount of capital, but not enough to subsist solely through exploitation. Many small business owners are self-employed professionals who have to work full-time in order to maintain the upkeep on their business.
The people on the assembly lines are true workers, sure, but what about their manager? He's doing real work by making sure everyone stays on task, resolving interpersonal conflicts, and turning his boss's commands into doable tasks. His leadership is real work.
Yet another straw man. Marxism isn't anti-manager, it is anti-capitalism. The point of our message is that the factories, firms, roads, farms, utilities companies, and telecommunications companies should not be run according to what is most profitable for a minority of private owners, but to the benefit of the general public. We want all of the means of production brought into the realm of serving the greater good and democratic accountability, something which cannot be done as long as we continue to play this market game.
But what happens if we take things up the chain a little? Let's talk about CEOs. A recent by academic standards, study examined how exactly the CEOs of multi-billion-dollar corporations spend their time, and they're actually even busier than I thought they'd be. On average, they work 62.5 hours a week, exceeding the average American's work week and the average leftist work week.
I work 50 hours a week doing hard manual labor in a warehouse packing trailers full of furniture, industrial chemicals, carpets, gym equipment, and pet food. Most of these packages that I transport weigh between 50 and 150 pounds. So you can take that ignorant statement that leftists don't work and shove it up your ass.
They work on the vast majority of weekends and on the majority of vacation days, and the work they're doing is incredibly important. They have to decide how much resources to allocate to different areas based on possible future performance. They have to decide how to quickly cope with changes in their area. A good CEO can mean great things for his millions of workers, while a bad one can ruin their lives. This job is hard to do and very important, and so of course, the people that can do it well will get paid a lot of money.
Yet another straw man. First off, nobody's arguing that the CEOs don't do hard or important work. What we are arguing is that the work that they do is a disproportionately smaller contribution relative to the rest of the employees in the company, and that they do not earn the kind of money that they do working hard or taking risks.
Could one make a case that the boss at the top of a company works twice as hard as somebody at the bottom of the company, and thus deserves to be compensated twice as much? Sure. Could a case be made that the CEO works 5 to 10 times harder and deserves to be compensated 5 to 10 times as much as the people at the bottom of the company? I don't know, maybe. However, is there a case to be made that the CEO works 800 times as hard as the people at the bottom of the company and thus deserve to be compensated with 8 times as much pay on the hour? Is it even possible to work 800 times harder than the average person?
That and the work done by CEOs could be done by anybody with sufficient training in economic planning and high-level management. CEOs aren't this uniquely superhuman phenomenon where only 1 in a million people have the ability to perform the job. Not only that, but CEOs aren't the ones creating the wealth. That would be the laborers on the grounds driving the trucks, distributing the packages, manufacturing the goods, packaging the goods, growing the food, cleaning the floors, managing logistics, etc. A company could do without the boss making tens of billions of dollars off the labor of others. A company could not survive without the workers on the ground generating all of that value in the first place. Hence why general strikes are so effective, and why the capitalists have historically lobbied the governments to crack down on unions and labor organizing. Lastly, many capitalist apologists will argue the following. Well, they might not work as hard, but they take the risk. They spend their money on ideas and projects that might not succeed, and thus, the health of the firms hangs in the balance of the CEO's superhuman decision-making skills.
To that, I say 3 things. 1. Who gives a shit? Ancient tribals took a risk when they went about raiding, raping, enslaving, and pillaging villages. Unethical or inhuman behavior being risky does not make it okay. Number 2. Winning money through gambling does not mean that you earned it. It means that you got lucky. If I buy tickets and win a bunch of money from the lottery, could you say that I took the risk? Yes. But could you say that I earned that money when I won the lottery? No. I just got lucky enough that the outcome succeeded in my favor. And lastly, 3. Millionaires and billionaires fuck up all of the time and still remain rich. If a capitalist makes a poor investment and fails, it's the workers who suffer, not him. Because if the project fails to turn a profit, then all the workers get laid off. Meanwhile, you've got the likes of Donald Trump, a multi-billionaire who has filed bankruptcy on numerous occasions, crashed half a dozen businesses, has thousands of active lawsuits against him for fraud, and conned thousands of people out of millions of dollars with his Trump University scam. And guess what? He's still a billionaire. He isn't seeing any retribution or punishment for his actions. He isn't seeing any punishment for his mistakes, despite his many fuck-ups and fraud. It's only other people who end up suffering for it in the long run. Meanwhile, when poor people make mistakes, they tend to stay poor. Research has shown that the stress of poverty tends to cripple one's ability to make judgment calls and psychologically binds people in a position to where they will continue to make mistakes that keep them poor, locking them into the cycle of poverty. Researchers performed IQ tests on hundreds of poor Indian farmers, and they found that there was as much as a 13-point disparity in IQ tests before and after the harvests and payday. In other words, the state of impoverishment literally locks you psychologically to continue to make decisions that will keep you poor, as the stress from poverty literally lowers your IQ.
This system rewards those who are the most cutthroat, ruthless, self-serving, and sociopathic. So it should be no wonder why there is a long list of millionaires and billionaires who flew the Epstein Express, a private airplane service where the flight attendees got to have sex with children. So if you are pro-billionaire, if you are pro-capitalist, then I'm afraid to say that you are basically in favor of a minority of unelected oligarchs at the top of the food chain hoarding all of the wealth and resources for themselves, while everybody else toils living paycheck to paycheck while they plunder the planet and literally get away with raping children.
Of workers. Consider Boeing. They recently fired their CEO due to his many failures. In doing so, they protected their workers from his inability to lead. If the CEO has the job of managing the company in the short term, the owners have the job of managing it in the long term. They might own a stake in the company that goes back generations, and they'll want to preserve it for generations to come. So if the CEO plans to make a bad move that'll be good in the short run and then he bails out, they're the ones with the job of stopping him. Of course, this is great for the average worker, who might be at one company for his entire life. And for this incredibly important job, they get compensated, as anyone working for the interests of the company its workers should be.
The goal of the company is to reap as much profits as possible, while at the same time externalizing the social costs onto the public and the environment as much as possible. It's the reason why every time the stock market gets hyperinflated and the economy inevitably comes crashing down, it's the firms and the banks that get bailed out on the dime of the taxpayer, despite causing the economic crash in the first place. It's the reason why, despite selling fraudulent toxic mortgage packages back in 2008, then betting on those same packages to fail, the people responsible ran out the back door with all of the money while millions of Americans lost their jobs, their homes, and what little financial equity that they had at the time. It's the reason why, if we were to take virtually every industry on Earth and force them to pay for the costs of ecological destruction that they externalize onto the environment, that we would effectively be bankrupting virtually every industry on the planet by doing so. It's also the reason why, despite the fact that the internet, cures for diseases, and the technology that goes into our smartphones has been developed by the public sector off of our tax dollars, we have to go through a greedy middleman in the form of private companies in order to get access to the fruits of the research done off of public sector funding. It's the reason why back in the 1930s and 40s, automobile companies lobbied to privatize our public transportation, setting up dummy corporations which would take ownership of the trains, trolleys, and subways, and then immediately moving in to dismantle these companies afterwards, forcing the public to be dependent on automobiles for centuries to come, despite the fact that private automobiles are more costly, less fuel inefficient, space inefficient, and dangerous than mass public transit. This is the reason why we need to get away from the profit motive as a society. We need to run our economy and produce according to a rational plan. Under socialism, the companies wouldn't have to worry about going under due to being unprofitable because they would be kept solvent so long as they served a valid social purpose. Next up, Just the Feels makes the point that the owners of these mega corporations are only compensated a humble 2.4% of the company's earnings. Therefore, they deserve to be millions of times wealthier than the average person.
They're compensated through dividends, which is an amount of money paid to each of them for each share that they have. How much are they compensated for this extremely important job? 30% of net income for the largest 500 companies in America. That might seem like a lot, but let's put it in perspective. First, it's gone down over the decades, and in fact it was 90% during the 1930s. Second, it's 30% of net income, the profits, which are about 8% of total income for America's largest 500 companies. So for overseeing all of management and planning for the long term and the stability of all the workers, the wicked bourgeois are compensated 2.4%.
Yes, the rate of profit has declined over time as the massive profits have increased. In absolute numbers, companies are raking in record amounts of returns on investment. However, relatively speaking, a smaller percentage of total investment is making returns as a growing amount of money is needed to pay for the increasingly advanced and expensive constant capital. As time goes on, the organic composition of capital, or the ratio of constant capital C, that is the machinery and technology used to produce goods, versus variable capital V, that is, the workers who operate said machinery and technology to produce goods, has only increased exponentially. Capitalists in competition are driven to advance their productive machinery so that they can outcompete their neighbors on the market. However, better and more expensive machinery means less manpower is needed to produce goods, and a larger percentage of investment is needed for the upkeep and advancements of said machinery. The result is the people are put out of work, the market gets oversaturated with goods, meaning that economic crashes and profitability crises occur in the short term, and in the long term, the total rate of profit, the total net returns on investment, goes down as machinery becomes more sophisticated and expensive. This is the reason why we live in the service economy now, as only a small percentage of the workforce is needed to participate in manufacturing to reproduce civilization. We are at a point productively where only a minority of the population needs labor to subsidize the existence of the non-productive workforce. This doesn't disprove the existence of surplus value or exploitation. If anything, it vindicates it, as the ownership class has also been driven to increase the rate of exploitation following this trend. Today, the gap between the lowest and highest earners is higher than ever before, and the rich have never been richer. And one of the reasons for this is because through advancing the productive forces, through increasing labor productivity, and thus the total profits which can be valorized, the rate of exploitation has been risen to astronomical levels beyond what it was decades ago. Now, in a world that made sense, we could take advantage of these highly advanced productive forces, creating durable, long-lasting consumer goods designed to be serviced, upgraded, and recycled, reducing consumer demand over time, which would on one hand lower the ecological impact of industry on the environment, while on the other hand shortening work weeks down to 15 hours or less, freeing up massive amounts of personal leisure time for everyone. But since we live under capitalism, and there's no shortage of ideologically blinded idiots out there like JustTheFacts trying to gaslight us into being grateful for being exploited, people are instead poised to spend 40 to 50 hours a week, that is, most of their vital, productive waking hours slaving away at a job that they hate which serves no real social purpose, shackled with crippling credit card debt, automobile debt, student loan debt, mortgage debt, and healthcare debt, with no real equity of their own, while we wreck our earthly habitat with our unsustainable industrial practices just so we can keep a tiny minority of oligarchs ultra-wealthy, just so we can upload a system where the individual has a 1 in a million chance of becoming exponentially wealthier at the expense of their neighbors, when scientific studies have actually shown that there is no correlation between increased income levels and increased happiness after one is making roughly $70,000 to $80,000 per year.
The favorite answer that leftists bring out when all this is brought up is, why don't the workers do these jobs themselves? The answer is, they often do. Beyond the stock options offered by many corporations to their workers, where they can gain power over their company's decisions, quite a few corporations are organized in co-ops. Here the workers act as the owners and engage in oversight through democratically electing their board members. They don't act as their own CEOs because, as anyone who's tried to work from home will tell you, you can't really manage yourself. The jury's still out on how well these perform compared to normal corporations, though, ironically, their workers are paid less on average than those of a normal corporation. The most recent real study I could find said that they were less than impressive when it came to competing overseas, as large companies have to. So we're led to believe that even if they are better for the individual worker, they're worse when it comes to producing goods at affordable prices, so they're bad for society as a whole.
On the point of employees owning shares in a company giving workers control of the means of production, the opposite is true. No individual worker will ever have the kind of economic leverage over a private firm in that way, as the bulk of the shares in companies are owned by the top 1% of the population, and it is in their interest to run the firm to their benefit at the expense of others. On the contrary, workers owning shares in a company actually jades their interests in being aligned with that of the capitalist system, since the failure of the system means the loss of what little equity that they have. It's the reason why the middle class is so reactionary. They've been given just enough wealth to the point to where it is, too, in their interest to keep the whole system going. And on the point of cooperatives, the construction of a socialist economy would entail the nationwide cooperatization, nationalization, and socialization of all industry, as well as the abolition of private property and exploitation. Cooperatives, on the other hand, are not socialism. They're an alternative enterprise model to the traditional firm where the workers jointly own the company. And while they are certainly nice as they provide a better environment for the workers, in an economic system predicated on ruthless exploitation, I'm afraid, cooperatives will struggle to grow and compete, let alone get loans for initial startups, since investment banks tend to discriminate against cooperatives as a model. So not only is there a great deal of systematic political and economic discrimination against co-ops, they are also not an answer to the problem of capitalism itself. This is the reason why we communists argue for real systematic change. We want decommodification. We want to do away with the profit motive. We want to end the exploitation. We want an economy that rationally allocates resources while maintaining a balanced load with our earthly habitat. And due to the incentive structure and the inherent limitations of the free market capitalist system, these goals will never be realized due to the structural limitations of capitalism.
They're worse when it comes to producing goods at affordable prices, so they're bad for society as a whole. That's to be expected when you consider the decades of experience that the average CEO and board member at a Fortune 500 firm usually has. I love democracy, but you can't expect the average assembly line worker to know exactly how to manage his firm's performance on top of his regular job.
And time's up. Just the facts. You have done nothing but strawman Marxist and communist positions throughout this entire video. Your apparent critique and debunk of surplus value is based on a complete strawman. Virtually none of the arguments that you presented even had anything to do with the topic that you were trying to refute. Your analysis of the way capitalist political economy works and the solutions that you think that we advocate reek of capitalist realism and are incredibly naive and in the box. And it is apparent by the fact that you have a 4-year economics degree that the level of propaganda, brainwashing, and misinformation that they teach in economics, a field of study that was once actually about understanding the economy, has now been co-opted by the ruling class and transmuted into this pseudo-religious, hyper-optimistic analysis that exists to justify present economic conditions as they are. But then again, I suppose none of us should be surprised that an unironic monarchist is a textbook bootlicker. This is the end of part 1. Shout out to my Patreons on screen. Your gratuity is greatly appreciated. If you enjoy my content and my work and would like to see me produce more, please consider supporting me by donating to my Patreon, rating, commenting, subscribing, and sharing this video. The extra money sure does go a long way. But anyways, that's all I have to say. Stay tuned for segments 2 and 3.